Pregame.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Pregame TV. We're talking Major League Baseball. He's Brian Leonard. I'm Scott Spreitzer. We're going to look at the American League on this edition. And Brian, before we jump into breaking down each division and giving out our picks on over-unders for the projected win totals, you've got an old handicapping tool that you wanted to bring up, and I'm going to follow that up with a new sabermetric type of tool that I've kind of incorporated into my handicapping over the past couple of seasons.
I liked it how you got old and you pointed toward me like that.
I know I look older, but I was making sure.
Yeah, I'm not that much older than you are here, guy. Actually, this is something I picked up a long time ago. I think Arnie Lang put it in his book. I think it's called Handicapping 101. But basically, there's two things you look at in the off season. Look for a little bit regression to the mean in one-run games. Basically, one-run games, there's a lot of luck involved in one-run games. So if a team had a really good season in one-run games, look for them to basically the opposite the following year.
It's like a turnover ratio in football.
Yeah, it's very similar, and we'll talk a lot of this regression to the mean as we discuss these divisions. The second thing is teams who play very well in the preseason, exhibition, whatever they call it in baseball. I went down and I charted the teams that played 600 ball or better. Now, granted, today's the last day, as we're taping this, of preseason. Some teams are playing college teams, or playing all-star teams, whatever. So basically, I made a listing of the teams that are playing 600 ball or better in exhibition play, and those are the teams you really want to play on, especially if they got the situation where they had a really bad year last year in the one-run games. Those teams, there was 7 of them this year. Toronto. Toronto was 29-28 last year in a one-run game, so not much there. Detroit's playing really good ball, but they actually 29-17, so they were very fortunate last year. So they've got just the opposite. So part of it is a play on, part of it a major play against. You got Oakland. Can't even talk about them because they've already started playing. You can't bet the over-unders, but they were 20-25. They would probably be the one that would qualify mostly in this. Seattle's 26-28 in one-run games last year. The Angels 27-31. Maybe the Angels are a little bit of a overplay in seasonal wins. The Yankees 21-24, slight lean to the over there, and then St. Louis 26-23. Maybe a little regression to the under there. But I just wanted to throw that out. It's something I've worked at in the past, something to keep an eye on in the future. There's not a lot there for this year, unfortunately, but something to keep track of for future years.
That's good stuff. I was going to mention real quick, how much do you factor in when a team makes such a big lineup improvement or maybe falls off in their lineup by letting somebody strong get away when it comes to that? For instance, you mentioned Detroit being such a solid team, best in the league, I'm guessing, in the major leagues last year as far as winning one-run games, and now they add Prince Fielder to the mix as far as the hitting is concerned. Does it make you kind of put a little caveat on maybe they regress as much as you thought they would have if the lineup stayed basically the same?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Detroit because we're going to talk when we're done here. We're going to talk about over-unders for the season, and that's at least my play on over-under, and I think you've got a similar view on it. But we'll talk more about that when we get to that point. But yeah, it's something you always have to take a look at how the lineup is, and offense as well as defense.
See, I like it when that situation comes up, and I think Mike Lee was the first one that told me about it a long time ago, several years ago, and he borrowed it from Arnie, who, like you said, broke it down in his book. But the late Mike Lee had kind of pointed me in that direction in a baseball season back in the late 90s. But one of the things I like to do with that regression to the mean, or progression to the mean, if you will, either way, is when a team like the Angels, for instance, and we're going to break them down by division in just a bit, and we'll give you our thoughts on the major players in Major League Baseball in each division. But when you look at the Angels, who were 4 games below 500, as you said, they had 31 losses by 1 run. They had 27 wins. They bolster that lineup, not just the lineup, but the pitching, and we'll get to that in a bit also. And it kind of like goes in stride with where they should probably go as far as coming back to the mean a little bit. They've also bolstered the lineup in the pitching, which might mean you even have a better chance to be a little bit better in one-run games than they were last year. So I like it when they kind of go in stride together, those two situations. A newer situation or tool that I like to use when it comes to handicapping baseball, and I've been using this for a couple of years now, and it really helps me more, I think, in the early portion of the baseball season. It's called FIP. It's a sabermetric, and it's fielding independent of pitching, as you know. And basically what it's doing is it's saying that the pitcher has very little control after he throws the pitch once that ball's put in play. And what you're doing is wiping out any errors and things of that nature, throwing mistakes, fielding mistakes, and you're judging the pitcher on just raw pitching stats. You take the fielding out of the equation and you get a really good idea as to how good a pitcher is throwing, his quality. For instance, Kobe Lewis, ERA and FIP jumped up last summer He had a 4.40 ERA. He had a 4.54 FIP. That is not good, a 4.54 FIP. And although his Ks per 9 innings pitched went down and his home runs per 9 innings pitched went up, he was 14-10 for the Texas Rangers because they scored so many runs for him. So let's start with the AL West. We'll start a little bit here with the Rangers and, of course, the Angels. Seattle and Oakland began their season last week in Japan. You can't bet any over-unders as far as the futures are concerned with those two teams. They split in Japan. But Texas, of course, right off the top. They bring in Yu Darvish, the Japanese import. A lot of people are saying, man, if you get that fastball together, then that off-speed stuff is going to be simply nasty. We'll see if it lasts. I would say in the spring, by watching him before his last outing when he pitched against Colorado, he probably had about a B- if you graded it fastball during the spring. But ask Colorado's hitters, they struck out 11 times against Yu Darvish in his final outing in 6 innings, and all of a sudden that fastball was looking A+, and the junk that he throws along with it was looking spectacular also. So this is a guy I think we got to give a lot of credit to going into this season. He's not, I don't think, just going to be that guy who comes in, has a big spring, and then disappoints in the regular season, at least not in the early going, Brian.
Yeah, the early going is where you want to play him, because right now there's a lot of people out there, even though most of the people I pay attention to think he's just got terrific stuff. One of the things I use, another handicapping angle as we're talking here, is when pitchers come in, they're new to the league. The first time through the league, they have a lot of success. And mostly, a lot of left-handers have that success, but even though he's not a left-handed pitcher, he's a pitcher that nobody's seen before, just a couple of times in the preseason. So he's definitely a situation that is somebody I'm looking to play on, and Texas comes in with an over-under right now, currently about 92.5. The Angels also sitting at 92.5, so this is a two-team race right here in the West.
I remember before forums took over in our world of what we do, and you'd hear people talking about, this is a rookie pitcher, he's going to get lit up, and kind of you and I know, and a couple of other people have been just really banging the drum that you want to look to play an under or stay away from the game in most cases when you've got a young pitcher facing a lineup for the very first time. And, we've made a good deal of money over that over the last couple of years, Brian. But when you look at Texas, you had Kobe Lewis last year, who early on in the season, at least, I heard a lot of people around the Texas Rangers organization getting a little bit worried because it looked like his velocity, at least for the first 6 or 7 starts, was down from the season before. And if you look at that FIP number, that sabermetric number that I mentioned, if you look at his ERA, you'd have to think that it wasn't great throughout the season. He did look to me like he lost a little velocity, came on a little bit as far as his speed with his fastball in the second half of the season. But again, this is something that kind of puts a red flag up for me with Kobe Lewis.
Well, everything you said has made a lot of sense, but is there another team in baseball that's as deep at starting pitchers as Texas? Yeah. I mean, Ogando's in the bullpen now.
I'm splitting hairs right now.
Yeah. Feldman, they've got great starters, plenty of guys if one of them doesn't work out. So I'm not too worried about Feliz or any of the others. I mean, especially when you've got an offense like that. So to me, it's a two-team race, Los Angeles and Texas, and the other two teams they're not very good, to be honest with you. They just don't, they play in good pitching parks, so they'll be able to win enough home games to remain somewhat competitive. But they just don't have very good offenses in Oakland, Seattle.
And Texas really does, whether Josh Hamilton's out there or not. Of course, they're a much better team when he's healthy and focused on what's going on between the lines. But as far as, this team, I mean, up the middle, I like him. Napoli, one of my all-time favorite catchers over the past 10 years. That surprised a lot of people. When he was playing for the Angels at Anaheim, and Brian, when I'm allowing myself to be a fan, I'm an Angels fan, and I was really disappointed to see him having to split time when he was with the Angels organization. And the numbers he put up offensively last year, he probably is going to have a tough time matching this year. But he's turned into such a better defensive catcher than he was when he was playing under Mike Scioscia, which is kind of funny because I'm a huge Mike Scioscia fan when he was a catcher. My two favorites behind the plate were Thurman Munson, and I wasn't a Yankees fan, and of course Mike Scioscia for the Dodgers, and I wasn't a Dodger fan. Tommy Lasorda was so upset to see Mike Scioscia get away and not become a manager with the LA Dodgers. He goes on, takes over the Angels, and they're a perennial playoff contender. And this year, they're a World Series contender, and we're going to talk about them now. What do you say? And, the rotation is a dream rotation. Last year, everybody talked about the Phillies. This year, because of the addition of C.J. Wilson, everybody's talking about the Angels and some guy named Albert Pujols, who they brought out west. He's got a little bit to say about this new improved lineup. But when you break it down, you've got Jared Weaver, of course, who would have won the Cy Young if not for Verlander going nuts last year. Dan Herron, followed by C.J. Wilson. How good is that when C.J. Wilson is your third option? And then Irvin Santana posted his best career ERA last year, but he didn't always get a lot of runs. Not getting a lot of runs should be shored up by the additions that the Angels have made in the offseason.
Yeah, the Angels have got so much offense. They've got good players that they can't even get into the lineup.
Right.
It's just amazing the depth on that team, and the bullpen, the back of the bullpen. I think Walden will be a little bit stronger this year. Now they've had the job for a year. If they're healthy at the back of the bullpen, they're going to be a tough team to beat.
Well, that's the thing, and the number 5 right now is up for grabs. Looks like they're going to give it to Jerome Williams, but he's been kind of a disappointment. He was such a big prospect when he came into the majors. Hasn't really come to fruition, and Garrett Richards right now is likely to give Jerome Williams a run for his money for that number 5, but you're talking 2 weeks from now by the time they get to these guys. But Irvin Santana, I think, is the key, because I do believe C.J. Wilson's going to likely win 15 as long as he stays healthy. Dan Herron, they said, had the dead arm issues at one point of spring training. He said, don't worry about it. He comes out in his last start of the spring and mows them down, has a good, solid outing. I think he went 5 2/3, gave up 1 earned run, struck out 5. He looks fine. Jared Weaver's going to be good, at least close to as effective as he was last year. So I like the addition of Chris Iannetta. I think that's a better situation behind the plate for this team than what they had last year. And of course, Pujols batting between, well, at least in front of, behind Howie Kendrick is only going to make Howie Kendrick that much better. Want to see a little bit more from the top of the lineup when it comes to this team hitting from the plate. I want to see him get on base, have a higher on-base percentage. But right down the lineup, man, they've got speed, they've got youth, and they've got veteran leadership. They're solid on the mound, and they're solid as far as the lineup is concerned, Brian. And if they don't get to the postseason this year, then all of a sudden Mr. Socha goes from being one of the most well-respected managers into what happened, Mike, and he's got some answers to come up with if they don't get there. I think they will. 2 wild card slots open. I think Anaheim and Texas, one of those teams will win the division. One of those teams will get the wild card.
We don't want to make this an hour-long preview as we go through all these games. Well, I don't want to. I've got plans today. But and I know the listeners and the watchers of the show also have plans. But let me put you on the spot. Both teams scheduled to win 92.5 games. Right. Who wins this division?
Well, I'm going to lean towards the Angels. And the reason I am is because I don't trust Josh Hamilton being healthy. He never is for an entire season. He misses big chunks. And when you look at, besides Hamilton, when you look at the Texas Rangers over the past couple of years when they've gone to back-to-back World Series, they've basically stayed key player injury-free for long periods of time. That is not easy to do year in, year out.
Hamilton's been in and out of the lineup.
Well, that's what I said. Hamilton, other than him, though, it hasn't been that way.
Well, and Nelson Cruz also.
But the pitching has been there in that ballpark. And now they don't have C.J. Wilson. They're losing him. Yu Darvish, he's an unknown prospect. I think he's going to be good. But I think that the difference is that I think the Angels, with Pujols, okay, he went 0 for in his last spring training game, his first game at Anaheim Stadium. But the bottom line is, I just think he makes everybody else in front of him and behind him so much more effective. And let's not forget, he didn't exactly come flying out of the box for the St. Louis Cardinals last year. Was one of his worst regular season starts in his career, yet the team still found a way to win in the end and go on and win the World Series. So I'm going to back the Angels, but I'm not saying I don't want to live off the difference. I don't want to make a living off the difference.
Well, this is going to be on tape here.
Yeah.
You're taking the Angels?
I think they'll nudge out the Texas Rangers.
I'll take the Texas Rangers in this division.
If they're head-to-head, barring injuries.
All right, I'll take Texas, and we'll go head-to-head and see how this ends up.
And Brian will shave his head if he loses. No, okay. On to the AL Central.
If Oakland or Seattle wins this division, I'll shave my head.
Okay, sounds like a deal. Brian's going to shave his head. I'm not making that deal. The AL Central's up next, the worst division in baseball. Here's your chance to talk about the Tigers. We both like the same future in this particular team.
All right, well, I was going to wait till the end, but we'll talk about it right now.
Well, we can wait till the end.
You want to wait till the end?
Sure.
Okay, well, let's wait till the end. Let me just touch a little bit about Detroit's projected to win 91.5 games in this division. Nobody else is expected to have a winning record. Right. Let me just talk a little bit. We'll leave Detroit for the future. Let's talk a little bit about Chicago. Chicago is a team right now that nobody wants any part of. It's a situation that I think actually there's 75.5 right now. I think there's actually a little bit of value on the over in the Chicago. You've got all your players on the Chicago team all had down years. Maybe A.J. Pierzynski might have been the only guy who actually played well last year. The pitching, they've got very good pitching. They did lose Mark Burley to the National League, but Chris Sale could be the best out of the bunch. Now he's going to be in the starting rotation. You've got a healthy Jake Peavy.
Yeah.
Jake Peavy actually said this is the best he's felt since he's come over to the American League. 75.5 wins. I think that's a little bit low. I think a lot of people are giving Detroit a walk through this division. I'm not so sure. Cleveland's at 79 wins. I'm not a big believer in the Indians this year, unfortunately. That's my team. But I like the way they've got ground ball pitchers starting off here. All the players, all the major guys in the rotation of ground ball pitchers, they've shored up the defense. They got Hanrahan playing third, brought in Kochman to play first. I think that's going to help. Minnesota's a team. It all depends on the big two. Injuries.
Right.
I mean, if they come in healthy, Minnesota could probably beat the 73 wins. But to be honest with you, I'm not big on Minnesota this year. I'm not sure either one of those guys will be able to put up 500 at bats. You got Kansas City. Interesting Kansas City. They're projected to win 78. Kansas City is a team, great hitting, terrible starting pitching. They've got a lot of talent in the back of the bullpen.
Sure.
But are all these guys going to be able to come through? The bullpen, everybody talks a lot about the bullpen. You're only going to pitch 200 innings. That's basically one starting pitcher.
Right.
You really need to worry about your starters, and that's really the problem with Kansas City.
Well, here's the thing about Kansas City. Right now, they're the darling team out there. As you said, they're projected to win 78 games. Last year, they won 71. The thing that really irks me about the Kansas City Royals is that everybody has talked about how well this team played at home last year. So we're not likely to get a lot of really good prices on the Kansas City Royals early in the season in those home games. They were 20 games below 500, but they were right there around 500 when it came to what they did at home. And that's 2 years in a row now. In fact, Baltimore was the same thing. Kansas City and Baltimore have had horrible overall records, but at home, when you catch them as a dog, you're doing okay money-wise. But now we're going to get everybody jumping on the Royals bandwagon. They had the best Cactus League offensive stats if you're into spring training. I'm not a big spring training guy, by the way, when it comes to handicapping baseball. I generally wipe all that stuff out. I remember early in my career getting really crazy about some, this is 20 years ago, get really crazy about some spring training stats.
So you had pitchers, Tuffy Rhodes on your fantasy team?
Tuffy Rhodes, oh my gosh. And I'll tell you what, I had one of my worst months of April I ever had. That was about 20 years ago. But the only time I really look for spring training are guys coming off major surgeries, Tommy John, things like that, and also young players, how they do when they're going up against major league hitters. But they were 303 batting average, 155 runs scored, led the Cactus League on offense. Had 4 hitters on the lineup hitting at least 385 in spring training. I like this kid Hosmer. He left Arizona with a 13-game hitting streak, major league leading in RBIs in the spring. But here's the thing, their opponents hit 301 against their pitching last season. You already hit on how bad their starting rotation can be. Only one pitcher, Bruce Chen, who's their ace, if you will call that, has a winning Major League Baseball record in his career. He did finish well last year, 3.77 ERA and about a 1.30 WHIP in 25 starts. He's not bad, but he should not be your ace. No. And Luis Mendoza, he was a beast this spring, but again, I just think that they're right at the spot where you don't want to jump on this team to play the over because you're expecting them, I think, to progress too much over what they did last season. You can say they were just 10 wins away from 500, but they were 10 wins away from 500, so there you go. I agree with you on the Indians and on Minnesota, and I'm going to save the Detroit Tigers for our final analysis as we talk about over-under win projections.
There you go.
Let's head over to the American League East. Yankees projected rotation looking strong. Sabathia, Kuroda, Nova, Pineda a bit banged up right now. He's expected to be the 4. Phil Hughes is the question mark, the enigma for me, because at times he looks like he's got really good stuff, but he's never really quite got over the hump yet.
I think Phil Hughes is the key to that rotation because Pineda's having arm problems already. You got Kuroda, who's a fly ball pitcher. He's pitching in Yankee Stadium. Not a good combination. Nova's record last year didn't compare to, you talk about the FIP and everything.
Sure.
Nova had a very fortunate record last year. I mean, CC's who he is. The starters offensively, most of them are aging and they're starting to show. So how many at-bats are you going to get for A-Rod this year? I mean, the Yankees are a team that have a lot of big-name players, but I'm not sure they're going to live up to the hype. And, it's a situation in this division where when you play in Tampa Bay and you're playing Boston, you got to win 95 games to have a chance in this division.
Toronto's 1 through 9 not bad either.
Toronto is a team on the up.
Exactly.
But they've got such a tough schedule.
And without Jabba, being part of your bullpen, this bullpen just takes another step down when it comes to trying to get to Mariano Rivera. David Robertson, he's expected to do a lot as a setup man now for Mariano Rivera, but I'm kind of worried about the Yankees as far as being able to get to Rivera with the lead. And this team's not going to fall off drastically by any means. They're going to be in the playoff race. They probably have the second deepest lineup as far as I'm concerned in Major League Baseball or in the American League to the Texas Rangers in all likelihood. And but again, there's too many question marks. And Kuroda had a 3.45 ERA at Dodger Stadium, but Dodger Stadium is night and day different than Yankee Stadium, and he could have some problems if he gets into that fly ball mentality. As far as Boston is concerned, Brian, a lot of people say that this team's going to be back in the mix, and maybe they will be. But how much to you, and we didn't talk about this, so I don't want to put you in a spot here, but how much to you does Bobby Valentine taking over the focus of everything that everybody's doing detract from this team or help this team? I mean, Bobby Valentine is this overbearing personality, unlike Francona, who sat back and let the players take the credit. Every time you turn on the TV now, you're going to see Bobby Valentine before you see any player for the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah, I think in the short run it's a good thing. He's one of those coaches that tends to wear out his welcome pretty fast, but he's actually done very well. I mean, he went to Japan, had great success in Japan. I think he's probably what they needed. I think it just got to be such a lax atmosphere last year under the former coaches. I think it's something they need. But, you know, Boston's one of these teams that could go either way.
Sure.
I mean, you take a look at the Pythagorean theorem and everything. Last year, the runs scored, runs against type of thing compared to the wins. They probably should have won more games than they had, even with that
terrible
collapse.
start. And a terrible start, too.
Yeah. Middle of the season, they were a moneymaker.
They looked like the best team in baseball.
Yeah, they look by far the best team. So it's something to keep track of this year, because just at one point in the season, you may look really good. Doesn't mean you're going to be there all season long. 162 games, it's a marathon.
No John Lackey, but then again, there's been no John Lackey since he arrived in Boston a couple of years ago. Boy, the Angels knew when to pull the trigger on that guy. But also, you know, Dice K, I mean, he's out. I mean, he may return midseason. Lackey's out for the year. Papelbon's moved to the National League with the Phillies. We'll talk about him in just a bit. And the guy who was expected to start out the season as the closer is Andrew Bailey, and he's out right now indefinitely. He's banged up. So a lot of question marks with the Boston Red Sox. Carl Crawford, who's a pretty good 6 or 7 spot in most lineups nowadays, he's starting the season banged up. So there's a lot of question marks. I'd like to see the top of the order, the top 4 guys, do a little bit more up front. And Ellsbury, by the way, is healthy. He's expected to play in the opener. That was a question mark going into this week. But the team that's likely to challenge them, and we talked about Toronto having the great lineup, but is the Tampa Bay Rays, Brian.
Yeah. I really like Tampa Bay. Number one, they're a low-budget team. I always root for the low-budget teams. Number two, they play great defense. Always root for those teams. They've got a coach who's been around the block. He gets the players to fit his system. When you play good defense and you pitch, which is what Tampa does, you're going to be in these games. Now, granted, you know, a lot of people don't like Tampa because they don't score a lot of runs. Right. I mean, some of their middle infielders, let's be honest about it, they're replacement level players.
Right.
But they play well enough defensively and pitch so well, they have a big advantage on these other teams. They've got the best pitching in the division. They've got the best defense in the division. They've got good young players. I think Tampa's the team to beat in this.
They need Luke Scott and Carlos Pena to step up for, you know, departed players. Talking about Johnny Damon and Casey Kochman. And then, of course, the caveat to me always is when you have a guy who's been around the majors for a long time and now he's your closer, and you're talking about Kyle Farnsworth, and he had the career year last year, and now he's in his 13th season. Can he hold up for the entire season when he's now expected to be the guy that shuts things down? But you're right, that rotation is as good as it gets in that division, better than anything else anybody has to offer. So we've wrapped up the American League. We've talked about each division. Now it comes time to a future.
You're not going to talk about the Baltimore Orioles?
Listen, here's what I'm going to say about Baltimore. They're still a good, I was going to say a year away, but maybe a year or 7 away.
What you have seen the last 2 decades for Baltimore
is what you're going to see.
More the same.
When's the last time they had I think it was 96 or 97, the last time they topped 500?
I think Jim Palmer was doing underwear ads the last time Baltimore went to the playoffs.
5th straight season, in all likelihood, they finish in last place in the division. We'll just leave it at that. But let's talk about our one future that we're both looking at in agreement on, and that is the Detroit Tigers.
Yeah, many reasons to go against Detroit. Number one, everybody talks about this being the weakest division in baseball. All they're looking at is the teams that they play in this division. Number one, I don't think those 3 teams are going to be as bad as what people expect as a whole. Also, you know, nobody pays attention to the teams that are playing outside of the division. Detroit has to play the Yankees, Boston, Tampa Bay 27 times this year. They've got to play National League games, interleague games. The schedule is not conducive to a big winning year for Detroit. You take a look at Detroit's 1 through 9 hitters. They all had career years. They all had years above their norm. I mean, they had guys that just came out of nowhere. I mean, the catcher came out of nowhere. Right. They had a lot of guys that came out of nowhere. Victor Martinez had a big year. Oh, wait, no, Victor Martinez is out.
He's gone, yeah.
He's gone. Take a look at the outfield assists. A lot of people don't pay attention to outfield assists. Second in baseball in outfield assists last year. That doesn't happen. That always regresses towards the mean. Right. Take a look at his pitching staff. Verlander, not only Cy Young, MVP. The guy had the greatest year ever. Doug Fister, a journeyman pitcher, comes over midseason, plays great for Detroit. Is he going to do that again? I mean, you take a look at this Detroit team. The major reason I don't like them, defense. I mean, Brandon Edge at third base, great third baseman. He's not there anymore.
Exactly.
Miguel Cabrera playing third. Have you seen? And I'm not going to talk about.
Wasn't that good last year anyway, fielding the ball. You know, and they're even probably going to be worse this year.
Yeah.
And Prince Fielder, who comes over, made more errors at first than any other first baseman in baseball. So it's going to be like a team that has to score a lot of runs. This park isn't always conducive to a lot of run scoring. It is kind of a pitcher-friendly park, although I don't think Fielder is going to be at a big disadvantage because of the way the speed of his swing of the bat is still as good as it's ever been. But you know, other things that have to happen. I mean, Verlander has just a year for the generations
Yes.
last year. I mean, I know the guy's won 61 games the last 3 years and 102 starts. His FIP was below 3 each of the last 3 seasons. So if anybody can do it, it's a guy like Verlander, but you still don't expect him to put up those kind of Hall of Fame numbers that he did a season ago. Doug Fister, here's another guy you didn't mention yet, had a career year between Seattle and Detroit. He's going to have a big year again. Max Scherzer's ERA ballooned last year, and they're counting on him as being a big part of this mix. Rick Porcello had big numbers also. He's just 23. Maybe he has time to bounce back and have a good season, but he's got to trim that ERA. He had a 4.75 ERA last year on the mound for Detroit. They got to get that down to about 4.3 at worst if this team's going to get where they want to get, and if the total wins is going to be where the books have projected them to be.
Yeah, you mentioned Fielder. Interesting that we're talking about the defense for a guy named Fielder. But in reality, Detroit's got an all right-handed pitching lineup, which means everybody's going to stack their offense with left-handers.
Sure.
Which means he's going to get a lot of pulls down the right field line. More errors for first base. We already talked about Cabrera over there. And Fielder, when you take a look at, when you graph out his home runs last year in Milwaukee, and you paste that over the field where he's playing now in Detroit, those big home runs are now in the upper 20s, maybe 30.
Right.
So I don't think he's going to have as big a year as what they think. And everybody's talking about big offense. They're going to give just as much back defensively.
What's your current over-under on this?
It's currently at 91.5, and I think that's way too high. I'm going to play the under Detroit 91.5.
83 wins, maybe less wins the division. So they've got wiggle room as far as winning the division, and I believe they will. I think they can end up about 86 wins in that neighborhood, 84 to 86 wins.
I think they'll win the division, right. But to expect them to win 92 games to cover your bet, I don't think it's going to happen.
He's Bryan Leonard. I'm Scott Spreitzer. We're both taking the under in the Detroit Tigers win total proposition. We've also got National League broken down. Be sure to check it out right here at pregame.com.